literature festivals, words are bridges.
Words are bridges.
शब्द सेतु हैं।
अल्फाज दिलों को और इंसानियत को जोड़ने का एक अजीम और तरीन पुल है।
വാക്കുകൾ പാലങ്ങളാണ്.
लफ्ज़ च सवेरी कदल तारान
वहीनतुम
आखर हमार मेल संग आखर हमार जोड़
শব্দই সমন্বয়ৰ হেতু
Cocktail rock, yakraise.
Thuhi inkung kaila siam tu ani.
Ajrahana apati kisale.
Grauthaining yaukrai.
शब्द सेतु हुन
शब्दां दी सांस
Words are bridges. Our first session today is called the Multilingual Typewriter, where poet Sudeep Sen and Anamika will be in conversation with Malashri Lal. Iconic Hindi poet Anamika's first comprehensive collection of Hindi poems in translation is called My Typewriter is My Piano, Selected Poems, which has been edited and translated by well-known poet Sudeep Sen. Deeply embedded in a quiet and intellectually forceful brand of feminism, Anamika's work weaves together themes of politics, society, and domesticity. She is an empathetic and sensitive writer with extremely sharp observations and insights into the world around her. Poet Arundhati Subramaniam has said about the collection that Anamika's poem often promises to lead you in one direction, but a sly cross-current surfaces, pushing you to an unexpected destination. For the reader willing to play archaeologist, Anamika's poems will yield new insights with each successive reading. As a brief introduction, Anamika is a Hindi poet, novelist, and translator. Her poems Khurduri Hatheliyan, Doop Than, and Tokri Mein Digant are prescribed at national universities. Her novels Das Dware Ka Pijra and Tinka Tinke Paas have been staged as major productions in Marathi and in Malayalam. Her English publications include Transplanting British Poetry in Indian Classrooms, Done Criticism Down the Ages, and Feminist Poetics, Where Kingfishers Catch Fire, amongst others. Sudeep Sen's prize-winning books include Postmarked India, New and Selected Poems, Arya, which won the A.K. Ramanujan Translation Award, Fractals, New and Selected Poems, and Kaifi Azmi, Poems and Nazms. He has edited influential anthologies like the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, World English Poetry, and Modern English Poetry by Younger Indians. Sen's works have been translated into over 25 languages. His writings have appeared in leading publications around the country, and he is currently the editorial director of Arc Arts. Our moderator for the day, Malashri Lal, recently retired from her academic and administrative positions at the University of Delhi's English Department. She is a prestigious member of the English Advisory Board of the Sahitya Academy and Bharatiya Gyanpeeth's Advisory Committee. Lal has been a senior consultant to the Ministry of Culture, UGC nominee on committees, and a member of International Book Award juries. In this conversation with Malashri Lal, Anamika and Sudeep will read from their work and speak of the sources, inspirations, context, philosophy, and multilingualism of the poetic imagination. Their conversation will be full of honest confessions, artistic collaborations, and a testament to all the hard work that they have put together during the lockdown to launch their book in time. So once again, welcome everyone to Words Are Bridges. You can find us on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Do follow our handles, JLF Litfest, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get notified on upcoming sessions. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, don't worry. You can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. So ladies and gentlemen, we now present the Multilingual Typewriter, Sudeep Sen and Anamika in conversation with Malashri Lal.
Hello everybody. It's wonderful to be together, to see everyone after a long time, and thank you very much JLF for giving us this chance to talk about poetry once again and to share the views of Anamika and Sudeep and catch up on the new things that they have been doing. So it's indeed very good to have both of you on the screen, and you've been doing some outstanding work. Sudeep, we all know your excellent work in English, more than 24 volumes of poetry and other writing, and of course the very much acclaimed collections. I can recall Fractals, Erotext, Rain, Ladakh, and so many more. And Anamika, your writing in Hindi over the last 30 years or so We've been celebrating it, following it, particularly those of us who are into feminist writing. And thank you so much for those great collections of poems such as Tokri Mein Digant, Bijakshar, Pani Ko Sab Yaad Tha, etc. So what is it that brings both of you together in a joint and collaborative act of translation? That's what I'm very, very curious about. And both of you have published translations of each other's work right in this month of August 2020, as though the pandemic doesn't matter, that creativity flows as ever with both of you. And that indeed is absolutely wonderful. So what I'm actually going to focus on first is Sudeep, your collection, the first comprehensive volume of Anamika's poetry that you have translated from Hindi to English. And you've called this book, The Typewriter is My Piano. It's a lovely, lovely title. And Anamika, you will soon be publishing Sudeep's work in Hindi translation. And maybe I'm letting out a secret to everybody, which is fine. You're bringing out this book under the title, Mera, Sharir, Meri, Atma ka Sautela beta, which in English would be, my body is the stepson of my soul. I'm very curious about the decision that both of you took to take on this parallel enterprise of translating each other's work. So would you like to talk about that and maybe give us some samples of the work that you have done? Sudeep, will you go first?
Yes, of course. So good evening, all of you. It's lovely to be back in the JLF marquee umbrella, even though the umbrella is sort of invisible at the moment and we're sitting in our respective little cubby holes. It all started in the early 90s. I was a young poet, so was Anamika. We were at a Sahitya Academy translations workshop, which was an Indo-American translations workshop. And it was headed by David Lehman. Our particular workshop capsule was headed by David Lehman, who's, of course, as you know, is a wonderful poet and editor, and also the editor of a long-standing series, The Best American Poetry, that comes out every year. So we were all part of the same workshop, and that's how I first got introduced to Anamika's work, got interested in her work. And over a week, of course, we all critiqued each other's work, so we got to know each other's work deeply. We had what, maybe one or two books at that time. We were sort of starting out in a sense, young and wide-eyed. The wide-eyed bit still stays, hopefully. But since then, hairs have become grayer, children have grown up, friendships have become deeper. To me, really, at the end of it, it is the love for poetry and a trust of friendship. Without these two silos, you can't make anything possible which is worthwhile and which is solid and ingrained, which has got a plinth that is deep. Because without trust and love, nothing can work. So of course, I'm obsessed with poetry, so it was very easy. And the fact that we liked each other's work, we just decided actually quite spontaneously, let's just translate each other's work and see where it goes. And this was 30 odd years ago. We lived in different places and all. So that's how it really started. Yeah.
Wonderful. Anamika, what's your story?
My story is just almost the same, but beyond these happy coincidences that flowered in the 2 volumes of translated work, we also had a silent dream, in our heart. We were nursing a silent dream that if somehow we make this collaboration work and, do 2 Sutradhar bhashas, I call them linked languages are Sutradhars, they're like in ancient Sanskrit drama, you had Sutradhar, connected and offered critical commentary. If these Sutradhar bhashas, Hindi and English come together, they join on, they'll also lead on to a Sufiana silsila. They set the ball rolling and many such collaborations will take place. This is what silently we were dreaming about. And, we have 22 official languages and 1,900 mother tongues. So if we have a commune of English and Hindi writers joining hand, people of our generation, your generation, then maybe we'll be in a position to connect and build bridges across many smaller mother tongues, some of which are closer to Hindi, and some like Naga and Khasi, they are closer to English. So we can, and then deriving electricity from each other, they'll all be, alive and thriving. So this would, and every language opens a new window to the world. So with 222 into 1,950 languages, opening their windows and to the new world, new knowledge systems to the new world, will have a different kind of pluralistic setup. It will be, I mean, this is our Swahilian dream that worked somehow. Of course, these coincidences are there, but we also took an unconscious decision that we would be working towards that.
What a wonderful vision both of you have. So may I request you for some samples, maybe a poem that Sudeep you'd like to read and Anamika could read the Hindi translation. Can I suggest Kargil's, because we're talking about that so much these days? Is that okay?
Before I read the poem, I actually also just spontaneously want to talk about the coincidence. My book actually should have come out about 2 years ago. So it's actually two and a half years delayed. Anamika's book is in fact coming out on time. Both have come out in, both have come out in August. We both share August birthdays. So these are completely not planned 30 years ago. So the best thing work like that. But before I read, let me just sort of launch the book.
Wow.
It's here, it's beautiful.
Cheers. Congratulations, both
Thank
of you.
And,
Thank you, Sudeep.
I didn't realize, I chose the right color. You both are wearing red, so there we are. Brilliant. And it's
Lovely.
on Amazon.
Thank
it's
you.
on Amazon. So go and buy, 12 copies, all of you each, and give it. So many congratulations, Anamika.
Thank you.
So Kargil, yes. So Kargil will, of course, we talk about many of the issues we were talking about, building bridges, which is the theme of this series. So the only thing I need to tell you about this poem is the fact that I actually visited Kargil 10 years after the war. So it was just a sort of dusty old little town. And it was at the behest of my very young son, who wanted to go there, but that was part of a larger trip to Ladakh and Leh, and it was a 2-month trip. And Kargil was not on my itinerary, but as young boys do, they're playing with their plastic guns. So he thought if we go to Kargil, we'll find bombs and shells and so on. And of course, poor thing, he was very, very
And his little feet you captured in one of the photographs that's there on Atlas, I suppose. Yes?
And of course, he felt really guilty. But I'm grateful to my young son, or not young anymore, that this poem came out. So these are the blessings of magic of poetry. It opens with an epigraph from Derek Walcott's book-length poem, Pure Polo's Hound, and I quote, "A street of smoke and fences, gutters gorged with weed and reeking, scorching iron grooves of rusted galvanize, a dialect forged from burning asphalt, and a sky that moves with thunderhead cumuli, grumbling with rain." 10 years on, I came searching for war signs of the past, expecting remnants, magazine debris, unexploded shells, shrapnels that mark bomb wounds. I came looking for ghosts, people past, skeletons charred, abandoned brick, wood, cement that once housed them. I could only find whispers among the clamor of a small town outpost and full throttle, everyday chores sketching outward signs of normalcy and life. In that bustle, I spot war lines of a decade ago, though the storylines are kept buried, wrapped in old newsprint. There's order amid uneasiness, the Milsons cry, the monks chants, baritones merging in their separateness. At the bus station, black coughs of exhaust, smoke screen everything. The roads meet, and after the crossroad ritual, diverge, skating along the undotted lines of control. A porous garland with cracked beads adorns Tiger Hill. Beyond the mountains are dark memories, and beyond them, no one knows. And beyond them, no one wants to know. Even the flight of birds that wing over their crests don't know which feathers to down. Chameleon-like they fly, tracing perfect parabolas. I look up and calculate their exact arc and find instead a flawed theorem.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Anamika.
Yes, this is Kargil.
Please listen to your translation of a poem that's full of images and very evocative emotions.
Kargil. 10 साल बाद मैं ढूंढता आया युद्ध के पुराने निशान, ढेर पत्रिकाओं के गोले जो फटे नहीं थे, बमों के घाव ढूंढता चला आया प्रेतों को, गत प्राण कंकाल चिनके हुए, छूट गया ईंट काष्ठ सीमेंट जो उनको घर देता था। बस खुसफुसाहटें सुनाई दी मुझे खुसुर फुसुर चिल्लपों के बीच, छोटे से कस्बे के बाहर पूरे अवरोध में, रोजमर्रा के 10 कामों के बीच, अभिचित्रित करती हुई बाहरी चिन्ह सामान्यता और जीवन के, उस हलचल में ढूंढता हूं मैं युद्ध रेख 1 दशक पहले के, हालांकि वृत्तांत मिट्टी में गड़े हुए लिपटे पुराने अखबारों से, विचलन के बीच एक तरतीब अजान की, भिक्षु के जय की, मंद्र स्वर अपने विलगाव में घुले मिले, बस अड्डे पर खांसी काली थकान की, ढक लेती है धुएं से सब कुछ, सड़कें मिलती हैं और चौराहे की रीतिबद्धता से अलग भी जाती हैं, गुजरती हुई उस विभाजन रेखा से जो कि रेखांकित हुई ही नहीं। रंध्रयुक्त माला टूटे रुद्राक्षों की चढ़ी हुई है टाइगर हिल पर पर्वतों के और अंधेरी यादों के, पार पर्वतों के और अंधेरी यादों के, और पार उनके कोई नहीं जानता जिन्हें, और पार उनके जिन्हें कोई जानना नहीं चाहता, नहीं जानती चिड़ियों की उड़ानें भी जो के दरारों पर करती हैं पंखों की छां, कौन से पर वे करें अर्पित, उड़ती हैं पूर्ण वलैसी, देखता हूं ऊपर और मापता हूं बाक पंचापों का, और पाता हूं बदले में एक भग्न प्रमेय।
बहुत खूब। In your original languages, Anamika and Sudeep, your scope, interest areas and focus are rather different, if I may say so. Anamika's work has a definite feminist slant, but nevertheless, it's very rooted in Indian culture, particularly the small town, peri-urban, mohalla, community, family, that kind of environment. And Sudeep, your work in Kargil is one instance of it, is on a much larger scale of cosmopolitanism, of global perspectives, etc. So maybe opposites attract, and that's why you want to do each other's poetry. But can I just request that we now reverse the order? Would love to hear Anamika read that very popular poem called Namak. And I don't believe anyone has ever translated it before. It's a very difficult concept to put into English. Yes. So can we hear Namak and then Sudeep's translation of it?
I want to just say one thing. My poetry is also written from a feminist point of view, you know, and also a lot of Anamika's poems are written from a masculine point of view. So that is the one of the commonalities which people
musical chair happening between the two selves.
Yeah, I'm sure those dimensions will come through in our conversation.
Salt.
Namak parogi, Anamika.
नमक दुख है धरती का, नमक दुख है धरती का और उसका स्वाद भी। पृथ्वी का 3 भाग नमकीन पानी है और आदमी का दिल नमक का पहाड़। कमजोर है दिल नमक का, कितनी जल्दी पसीज जाता है, गड़ जाता है शर्म से जब फेंकी जाती हैं थालियां दाल में नमक कम या जरा तेज होने पर। वो जो खड़े हैं ना सरकारी दफ्तर, शाही नमकदान है, बड़ी नफासत से छिड़क देते हैं हरदम हमारे जले पर नमक। जिनके चेहरे पर नमक है, पूछिए उन औरतों से कितना भारी पड़ता है उनको उनके चेहरे का नमक। जिन्हें जो नमक की कीमत करनी होती है अदा, उन नमक हलालों से रंज रहता है महासागर। दुनिया में होने न दी उन्होंने क्रांतियां, रहम खा गए दुश्मनों पर। गांधी जी जानते थे नमक की कीमत और अमरूदों वाली मुनिया भी। दुनिया में कुछ और रहे न रहे, रहेगा नमक। ईश्वर के आंसू और आदमी का पसीना, यही वो नमक है कि जिससे थिराई रहेगी ये दुनिया।
क्या बात है?
Wonderful. This is a poem that we have heard before and we keep asking to hear it again and again because there's so much substance in the use of the word namak. Now these kind of cultural resonances, the meaning of namak to Gandhi or to the little munya or to the thali mein dal in which there is too little salt, how do you manage to put this into English when the cultural context of that language happen to be so different? So I'm very curious. Sudeep?
No, you see, the thing is, one of the big challenges about this particular poem was the use of the word salt itself, because she repeats the word so many times. And salt really doesn't have that many synonyms. And even if you start using synonyms, it won't be the right way of doing it and approaching it, because it is salt. It's a 4-letter word, salt, that is being actually explored, distributed, metaphorized, and so on. So I had to keep the word salt, but then I got the music of her poetry reading into the English reading so that there's some sort of a linkage. So here we go. This is actually one of the early poems I had translated. This was probably 25 years ago I translated it. Salt. Salt is the sorrow and the flavor of earth. 3/4 of the earth is salt water, and the heart a mound of salt. Salt has a heart so weak and infirm, it melts a little too fast. How it sinks in shame when plates are flung in a rage because of salt, a little too much. Big offices are grand salt pots, Deftly they sprinkle salt on all our open wounds. Like a crown they wear their salt and pepper hair. Women with dignity of salt pay a heavy price for all their salt. Loyalty is measured through salt. Salt, loyal salt, bound are the ones who put off revolutions. With a pinch of salt on tongue, they swallow it all. Gandhi knew the worth of salt. So does the little girl who sells guavas. One can't vouch for anything else. The salt in God's tears and human perspiration is the salt that would outlive us all.
Expertly rendered. And I love the way you've captured the many dimensions of salt, which doesn't originally have that kind of spread of meaning in English. I'm going to take both of you a little away from poetry to ask a question which worries many of us. Translating poetry is in itself an extremely difficult act, because not only the metaphor, the cultural context, but also the rhythm and the music that has to make that transition from one language to another. How about translating fiction? Is translating poetry a very different creative act than translating fiction? And do you think both of you being poets in your original language makes it a little easier to understand the particular challenge of translating poetry, and that it's a challenge which is more difficult perhaps than translating prose or fiction? What do you think? Anamika?
Poetry certainly is much, much harder to translate than fiction. I mean, for obvious reasons. One is prose, the other is poetry. In fact, if you're a poet, then translating prose is almost prosaic, boring. Not that the content is boring, but you get bored because, it's mostly linear. The sort of rhythmic ups and downs, the cadences are not there. It is there over a longer stretch of text, but it's not there in a short space. Also, yes, if a poet is translating another poet, then it makes it easier because you understand the mechanics of poetry, the analog and the digital aspects of poetry, the sort of invisible spaces of poetry. What you leave out is much more important often what is inked in on the page. So all those subtleties, if the other person is a poet, it's much easier to sort of work together. Also, the language is important. In this case, I understand and read Hindi. Anamika is a professor of English and she writes in Hindi, so the combination was very easy in one sense. There is no debate actually about fiction, because fiction is a lot easier to translate, so which is why most poetry doesn't get translated, because translators and publishers and academics want to read, teach, and use fiction because it's the easier option. We know why poetry is neglected. But let's face it, it's poetry which is always on the forefront when it comes to the most important things in life. Readings, and so on. There is absolutely no context. Fiction and poetry, they're two different worlds, and of course it's more difficult to translate poetry than fiction.
Anamika mentioned the very large number of languages with which we work in India, and a lot of those languages are extremely difficult to translate into another language, whether it's fiction or poetry. So I take what you say, but I think it's a debatable point for maybe another context. Yeah. But right now, Anamika, what are your views? Is it easier to translate poetry or fiction? And does being a poet help to tackle the nuances?
Well, I generally make some midwifery preparation because I have to deliver the text in a new context. So if I'm if my linguistic bones are tired doing my own stuff, to derive electricity from the lesser known languages, like tribal languages of the East, if I translate from English, of course, there also you have to, create twin text. Generally, my way of approaching is to deliver twin texts. In poetry, it becomes easier. For myself, I first read the poem aloud. to catch the reverberations, because in poetry, echoes are very important and they have to be created, recreated. As Anand Vardhan refers to Dhvanya Lok, it's the reverberation shedding cosmic light all around, and you have to catch those those electric currents and the light currents. So you have to be in some kind of a meditative silence. You have to listen to the deeper structure of a language. For that, I have found it very difficult, in fact, an exercise to read it thrice, especially when it's coming from an entirely new context, like a Khasi language, a tribal language. Then I read it aloud twice, thrice, 4 times to catch the reverberation. And then when I prepare my points of aporia, where I get stuck up, sometimes I refer to literary history, like when I was translating Wilke, I got stuck at many points, though I was sitting with somebody who is from Germany and she was reading it aloud for me, but still I made some notes, and then it became a very demanding exercise also, catching the literary history of the times and the challenges and things like that. Without that, so the rooted points are not very clear. And then I produce a twin text, one for the literal meaning of the text, and once the other text is very playful in my case. It's an intertextual dialogue with, I lump down the text in that second text, and then I recreate it according to the resonances that I've caught in my head. This is something, and this I create, then I enter a meditative silence to recreate meaning in my own context. And this is slightly difficult for me. Decoding culture is an act of responsibility, especially when you're translating something from an alien land. So there, decoding culture and raising cultural parallels also leaves a lot of scope for creativity. So in case of poetry, smaller stuff, for culturally rooted text, instead of footnoting culture, you can give a literal meaning and then a metaphoric meaning according to the new cultural code. This is something that I tried when I was translating from tribal languages, and it worked very well. They were happy with that. One was the intertextual dialogue with the original text according to the cultural code that Hindi has, and the other was the literal translation. In poetry, it can work, catching reverberation and decoding. But in prose, it's very difficult. You can't produce the technical and metaphoric meaning. Of course, metaphor means a lot of juxtaposition. In poetry, you have the scope of recreating the metaphor in a different thing. But in prose, you don't have to. You have to go linear, but then you have to sometimes change those, because I've also translated Doris Lessing, and that point of time I got stuck up anywhere. Like the novel itself, The Grass is Singing, was so difficult to translate, the title of the novel. Then I had to, play the politics of retention. I retained it because it was originally coming from Eliot. Instead of putting what you say call thick text. Thick text is like you have to apply prop roots like banyan tree here and there, pre-text, peritext and pretext, and then post-text. So these get the translation very heavy. So, when I translate from the prose, then I translate novels sometimes when asked to, then I break sentence structure to make the prose also a little lucid. And I sometimes change registers also. So everybody, in a workshop, Eliot calls it workshop criticism, but we all have our little workshops here and there. We keep trying. It's a matter of hit and trial. What else can we do?
Let me bring you both back to translating each other's work. I'm sure you have some favorite poems where the challenge was great, and at the end of the day, when you actually found the right word, the right structure, there was this moment of ecstasy that I've done it.
Yes,
Can you think,
Eureka
each
moment.
of you,
Yes.
of a poem where you had that sense of achievement after a difficult journey in translation?
For me, when I was translating Anamika's poems, I grew as a reader. I got to understand the personality behind her life more deeply, her interests more deeply, because it was done over 25, 30 years, where your own circumstances are also changing. So in fact, the poem Anamika chose that I must read and we must talk about is The Wailing Wall Revisited. It was not a poem I would have read today. I love it. I wouldn't have read it today. But she says, by the time I started translating The Wailing Wall, you had completely transformed into a new person. I mean, all the old bits were there, but there was a sense of maturity, understatement, spirituality was coming to the fore, though it was always there in my poetry, but I was being playful with it. Now that is the journey reversed. The same thing happened with me. So there was no pressure. So these wow moments kept happening because you do one poem and then you fight over it. There was very little fight. I'm of course anal about structure and form. So I think Anamika must have had a hard time getting.
Yes, of course.
I'm going to ask you, Sudeep, to just read a few lines because we are not going to be able to carry on this conversation in a lovely expanded manner beyond a certain point.
Yes.
So maybe 2 or 3 lines and then I'll move on to Anamika.
Well, it's not a very long poem. Let me just read it and see what happens. Yeah. So The Wailing Wall Revisited. And it opens with a quote from this poet Stretch Kosovel, and I quote, "A human being is not symmetrical. I gently touch you now, not the way I did 11 years ago, not with that yearning for faith and peace, but with a private prayer of inner calm, care, stillness, and for forgiveness and love. The gleaming hand-worn shine on Jerusalem stone, where the public merges with the private, where prayer and passion collide and unite, where a certain kind of kindness changes to another kind, where a certain kind of passion changes to another kind of desire. It is a blessing of time. 11 years is a lifetime. As I try once again to wedge in a piece of coded paper into the cracks and joins of the wall, I discover another paper behind the new one resisting my approach. I try to force it in. The more I try, the more impossible it gets. Failing, I now try to take out the old paper that prevents my will, take out that piece and resize my own prayers. But the longing of the past years resists dislodging the old. I prize out the old folded sheet. It looked weathered and yellow, like the local stone's sun-stained ochre. I open it. It is the same one I had put in 11 years ago. Time had preserved memory, preserved my wishes. Was I the same then as I am now? Was the feeling then more sincere than now? Passion for life never wanes for some. New love, like old love, balances its inherent truths. Here, gun-slung soldiers, pilgrims, children, and men in black garb move forwards and backwards, their axis, their waist, a symmetry that instills and heightens their own faith. A symmetry I cannot hope to aspire to, as I am, like Kosovo's man, not symmetrical.
Thank you. Anamika, I'm
Yes.
going to remind you of one of my very favorite poems in your corpus, and that has been translated by Sudeep as Woman's First State-Sponsored Tour. Can you please read it in Hindi?
Yes. एक औरत का पहला राजकीय प्रवास। वह होटल के कमरे में दाखिल हुई। अपने अकेलेपन से उसने बड़ी गर्मजोशी के साथ हाथ मिलाया। कमरे में अंधियारा था, घुप अंधेरा था कुएं का उसके भीतर भी। सारी दीवारें टटोली अंधेरे में, लेकिन स्विच कहीं नहीं था। पूरा खुला था दरवाजा, बरामदे की रोशनी में ही काम चल रहा था। सामने से गुजरा जो बेरा तो आर्त भाव से उसे देखा। उसने उलझन समझी और बाहर खड़े ही खड़े दरवाजा बंद कर दिया। जैसे ही दरवाजा बंद हुआ, बल्बों में रोशनी के खिल गए सहस्रदल कमल। भला बंद होने से रोशनी का क्या है रिश्ता, उसने सोचा। डल्लप पर लेटी, चटाई चुभी घर की, कहीं अंदर रीढ़ के भीतर। तो क्या एक राजकुमारी ही होती है हर औरत? 7 गलीचों के भीतर भी उसको चुभ जाता है कोई मटरदाना आदिम स्मृतियों का। पढ़ने को बहुत कुछ धरा था, पर उसने बांची टेलीफोन तालिका और जानना चाहा अंतरराष्ट्रीय दूरभाष का ठीक ठाक खर्चा। फिर अपनी सब डॉलरें खर्च कर उसने 3 किए अलग अलग कॉल। सबसे पहले अपने बच्चे से कहा, हेलो हेलो बेटे, पैकिंग के वक्त सूटकेस में ही तुम ऊँग गए थे कैसे? सबसे ज्यादा याद आ रही है तुम्हारी, तुम हो मेरे सबसे प्यारे। अंतिम दोनों पंक्तियां अलग अलग उसने कहीं। ऑफिस में खिन्न बैठ अंट शंट सोचते अपने प्रिय से, फिर चौके में चिंतित बर्तन खटकाती अपनी माँ से। अब उसकी हुई गिरफ्तारी, पेशी हुई खुदा के सामने कि इसी एक जुबान से उसने 3 लोगों को कैसे ये कहा, तुम हो मेरे सबसे प्यारे। ये तो सरासर है धोखा, सबसे ज्यादा माने सबसे ज्यादा। लेकिन खुदा ने कलम रख दी और कहा, औरत है, उसने ये गलत नहीं कहा।
Very lovely. तुम हो सबसे प्यारे. Sudeep, just that one line, what did you do with it in English?
I'll have to revisit it. Where is it?
It's a particularly maternal sentiment. And how does the English language enter into it?
The last line is where the way I've done it is, for women, all dear ones are the dearest.
That's very nicely done.
All dear ones are dearest.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Anamika, I have a question about your way of handling some of the body texts that there are in Sudeep's writing. There is a lot about illness, disease, physicality, erotica. From your own point of view as a woman, as a feminist writer, very briefly, if you could say, what was your strategy?
Okay, lumping down the text could have been one strategy had he not maintained the man-woman cosmic trio that we find in Kalidasa, that we find in, even Lawrence to some extent, and Vidyapati. Why these people, in my kind of feminism, our kind of feminism, we are not averse to body being a site of Joshua. We all know that both body and women's language have multiple centers of Joshua. So catching that would be slightly difficult for a man. But when we get aligned, man, women get aligned with Cosmos, which is there in his poem All True, then, you don't have that kind of a problematic side. I mean, where you do not commodify women, you do not, reduce her to a womb or to a boy. That kind of harmony that he creates. I mean, we have different energy centers in the, body in Indian scheme of things is just a stepping stone to a higher consciousness. So, just as, words are stepping stone to higher kind of silence. So if a poet achieves that, then I do not, have problems. But
I really like the way both of you worked in tandem, in collaboration, and continue to be good friends and admirers of each other's work. That's indeed a very promising situation. And as you both demonstrated, collaborative translation is perhaps the way for creating this body of literature that reaches out to multiple readers. And this session, which is about the multilingual typewriter, is basically about getting languages to interact with one another, which means poets have to interact with one another. So we really are coming to the end of this session, and I want to thank both of you for this very insightful discussion and very honest confessions and beautiful reading. Thank you very much, and we look forward to more collaborative work, not only between the two of you, but you show the path for other collaborative language work so that we have excellent new material available to all of us. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Maladi.
Thank you very, very much. This was thrilling, very short, very quick, but thrilling indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudeep, Anamika, and Malashri for that wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed the readings and also how candid you all have been during the session today. I'm really fortunate to have witnessed this conversation, and once again, many congratulations on launching the book. Thank you so much, all of you, for watching and being a great audience. If you've enjoyed this session, please do share it with your friends and all your social media pages. We really look forward to seeing you next week on another exciting session at Jaipur Literature Festival, Words Are Bridges. Have a great evening.